Good morning, my friends, and welcome to this special Shabbat called in Jewish tradition Shabbat Chol HaMoed Pesach, the Shabbat that occurs during the intermediate days of Passover. There are special prayers and readings to be recited on this special Shabbat, linking Shabbat with Passover, and even the usual greeting beginning every Shabbat service by saying Shabbat Shalom has been augmented by the inclusion of a special blessing for Passover. On this Shabbat, the customary greeting of Shabbat Shalom is followed by saying, Chag Pesach Sameach, may this be a joyful Passover. So let's stop and consider for a moment how these blessings might be heard by people gathered around Seder tables this year. To begin a service by saying Shabbat Shalom, praying that everyone might experience a day of peace, and to follow that prayer up with a prayer of gratitude for the joy of Passover in the midst of a plague may sound to some, or maybe to many, as at best an absurdity and at worst a callous insensitivity to the reality we are experiencing. How do I know this? Because some of you told me stories about how lonely it was to be separated from family and friends at a Seder, the very time when we expect to be surrounded by loved ones and friends. I know there are people who were gathered around Seder tables this year who fear for the future of their families, who worry about aging parents becoming critically ill, and there are those who are terrified they may lose their jobs and not be able to support their families. I know there are those who sat around Seder tables this year consumed by the fear that this is the new normal. And I wonder how these people hear prayers thanking God for the peacefulness of Shabbat and thanking God for the joyfulness of Pesach. How do I know these things? Because some of you told me about them. And I have to say how surprised and grateful I am to those of you who trusted me enough to speak to me of how painful this Pesach has been for you. You see, when I began to make these videos, I had no idea to whom I was speaking and who might be listening to what I was saying. I found it very different from giving a sermon where I can see how people are reacting to what I'm saying. But now I have a better understanding of what I need to say, because now I have a clearer understanding of who's listening, and that makes all the difference in the world to me. I have long thought that there were two different ways of knowing. There's a way of knowing that is essentially an intellectual experience, knowing all the facts and figures about a given subject is a form of knowing, and that can be a very helpful asset when you're trying to find a cure for a virus. The more one knows about a virus, the better one is equipped to deal with it. But while that way of knowing is good for learning how to deal with the virus, it is not a particularly helpful way in knowing how to deal with those who suffer from the virus. No, for that we need a different kind of knowing, which is to say that knowing everything about a subject may get you into Mensa, but it will not make of you a mensch. For that you need what I call kishka knowing something in the depth of your soul and in your blood. That is how I know what to say to you today. I know it in my kishkas, and I know it can help. As I mentioned before, there's a special Torah portion for this Shabbat, and it concerns the effects of the sin of the golden calf on the people and upon Moses and even upon God. We're told that the making of the idol so distressed God that he announced, I am removing my presence from the midst of this people. And just as God announced that, we're told that Moses took his tent and pitched it far outside the camp. Moses and God reacted in the same way to the deep disappointment and hurt they felt at what the people had done. They removed themselves from the people at the very time when the people most needed them. And the separation of Moses from the people not only did damage to the people, but also did damage to Moses. He knew the pain of separation was more than he or the people could bear. But from that pain came the great insight, the great lesson. Moses realized that in times of great crisis and trauma, the people needed to experience not the greatness of God, but the closeness of God. Not God heard in the thunder and the lightning at the top of the mountain, but in the still small voice and healing presence of God in the valley below. And it was then Moses understood what he must do. He had to see God to know that he was there. Now, of course, this request is denied by God. The finite can never really fully understand the infinite, but what God does is places Moses in the cleft of a rock, a safe place, a place from which the doubt and fear that Moses had felt was dispelled, and he could see the goodness of God pass before him. And that's the lesson that I know in my kishkas, how important it is to have a place when we feel threatened, fearful, frightened. I pray that each of us has a place where we can feel safe and secure and know that we are loved. I know the power of this from my own personal experience, and I suspect many of you do as well. When I was a boy, I was a troubled kid. I mean, I was acting out. I was not in a good place. And one winter night, I remember it was snowing and cold, and I felt like the world was crashing down around me. I was in trouble, and I walked to the end of the block to the shul where I knew my grandfather was, because he was always a healing presence for me. And in the midst of old books and old men, who didn't mind a kid lying down on an old couch, I felt safe and I felt secure, and I felt that in every shul that I've been in since. And I pray that we keep, the dissension out of the shul, because it is a place of refuge. It is a place where we have the perspective to see the goodness as well as the troublesome travails as well. I mean, I'm not saying that the cleft, that the safety and the cleft of the rock doesn't entail, some perception of the evil that exists in the world, but it lifts our eyes from that, and in the safety and security of in the cleft of the rock, we can see the goodness too pass before us. So it is my fervent prayer that each of us has a place where when travail and trouble assail us, and when we think that the world is ugly and that tomorrow is going to be worse than today, I pray that we have a place where we can feel safe and secure, and from that place see the goodness of God in the world. With all that being said, I pray that this place will be, for many of you, a place of safety and security, and a place of shalom. Shabbat shalom, my friends. Sei gesund.